Welcome to Dynamic Destiny. I'm your host, Coach Pete Cafarchio. I love to help people discover their life purpose and make a positive impact in the world. Whether you have a global dream or just want to make a difference in your corner of the world, we'll help you get clarity on your calling and give you practical tools to get unstuck and accelerate your goals. Join me for this episode of Dynamic Destiny. Hey, Coach Pete here. I want to let you know that this is the last episode of Season 2 of Dynamic Destiny. It's a great episode to end on. Dr. Mike Cafarchio tells his story, and I love it because it touches on so many of the principles we've been covering throughout this podcast. He talks about assessments, getting in touch with your passion, taking feedback from others, trying out different things. Talks about his own hurdles that he had to overcome, spiritual connection and values. It's beautiful how it all comes together to provide clarity. Plus, he's my nephew, and I'm really proud of him. So what's next for Dynamic Destiny podcast? Well, listen, I'm going to take a break from a weekly release schedule because I've had some other things come up that I'm putting my energy into. In the meantime, I definitely want to point you to a different podcast that I co-host with my friend Steve Chua. It's called Transform Your Life. So just do any search on your podcast listening platform, look for Transform Your Life with Steve Chua, and subscribe to it, and you'll get more content from me. It has a lot of the same themes as Dynamic Destiny, but even richer content. So I invite you to subscribe to that. I'll still put out episodes occasionally on this channel on various topics based on current trends in society, much like we did with the ones on racial justice and navigating politics. And look, these episodes that we did in Season 2 aren't going away. So if you missed one, I encourage you to go back and listen to any that you may have missed. And finally, thank you. I especially want to thank the people who took the time to email me or comment on social media. It's super encouraging to me when I hear about the breakthroughs and progress that you've made. So thanks so much for a great season. Now on to the episode with Dr. Mike. Hey, welcome my friends. This is Coach Pete coming to you live from New York City, and I'm so glad you tuned in. Today I have a special guest, but before we jump into that, I want to read our quote for the day. God wonderfully made you different. You must make a wonderful difference. That's by Ernest Yaboa. He said, God wonderfully made you different. You must make a wonderful difference. And that's what we talk about here on Dynamic Destiny. Uncovering your special gifts, what makes you unique, and then how can you leverage that to go make a difference in the world. And that's why I'm really glad to have my guest on today. It's Mike Cafarchio. Well, do you recognize that last name? Yes. Another one of my nephews. I had a different nephew a few episodes ago. This is another one of my nephews. I'm from a huge family, so I've got a lot to pick from, a lot of great, talented people. The reason I wanted to have Mike on here is I coached him through his strengths as a client, and a few things came out. First of all, he's a really humble learner, and frankly, he's just very self-aware for people, especially people that are his age. He just good sense of what he's good at. I really am looking forward for him telling you about his career field. It's fascinating, and he's really making a difference. And this combination of knowing his talents and applying them and this passion, how does it connect with your heart? And these are all things we all talk about and struggle with, and we're trying to figure this out. Mike's really hit it in a lot of ways. And so I really would love for him to share his story with you. Mike Cafarchio is a hospice and palliative medicine physician in Baltimore. In this work, he cares for kids and adults on some of their most difficult days and frequently grapples with life and death issues. He's also a husband, hashtag girl dad, amateur baker, and Phillies sports enthusiast, which we won't hold against him. So, Mike, welcome to Dynamic Destiny. So glad to have you here. Palliative medicine. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so I'd love to talk about it. Palliative medicine is a field where we partner with anyone who has serious illness, regardless of your diagnosis, and at any stage along your illness journey. We work to make sure that your quality of life is the best that it can be. And that just means like, how do we take care of you as a whole person? So we're experts in physical symptom management, like pain, shortness of breath, nausea, but also in addressing the emotional and the spiritual struggle that many people have with a serious illness.
Mike, is this always just restricted to like end of life issues?
That's a great question. So many people think of palliative care and they immediately think of hospice care,
Right,
which
right,
is
right, right.
so hospice, it's sort of like a rectangle square thing. So all hospice is palliative care, but not all palliative care fits into that box of hospice. So
Oh, okay.
hospice is only the last 6 months of a terminal illness, whereas palliative care can really be applied at any time along the illness journey. Um, in my work, I get to do both, so I'm excited to talk about both of those. And I like to partner with people when they first receive bad news about a diagnosis, all the way through the symptomatic journey and trying to cope with it, and also to try to achieve a peaceful dying process surrounded by the things and the people that they really love.
So I just have to imagine, Mike, in those situations, um, your your relational, emotional, awareness, your emotional intelligence has to be super high if you're gonna do a good job on that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's really it. So I think I identified early on in my medical training that I had a knack for relating to people. I had a high emotional intelligence compared to maybe other people who go into the medical
We,
field.
we we've all had bad doctors, so we we want doctors like Mike. That's who we.
And I just found that like I have the ability I can relate to a lot of different types of people very easily and quickly, and it allows me to build trusting relationships. Um, I've been working recently with some new fellows and learners, and sometimes like they're just sort of blown away by I can walk into a room, meet someone, and within an hour we're talking about their greatest fears, their hopes for their life, and their death, actually, and some pretty heavy topics. But I think I'm kind of good at making it seem not so intimidating and making it casual and comfortable, and to really help advocate for people to get the best care that they can get.
Wow. And Mike, I gotta assume too, like those kinds of conversations, it's with the patient, but it's got to pull in their family and close relatives too. So you're probably juggling emotions in those settings, coming from like a lot of different angles. And I mean, what's that like?
It's 100%. We think about the patient really is the whole family, and that's the whole family unit. And I was trained as a internal medicine doctor and as a pediatrician. So the pediatric mindset is always we're treating the whole family, and that's
Mhm.
what drives so well with this field of palliative care. You sort of have a sixth sense of kind of reading the room, knowing where the different emotions are coming from, and being able to attend to them, because every voice matters and everybody needs to feel like they've been heard. And that's actually one of my favorite things about my field is I get to have these big family meetings or huddles where we all come together and help each other make good, smart choices moving forward and navigate the medical field.
Wow. Well, Mike, can you share a story with us of a time when you got to engage that way and you saw, a change or movement, or you really were able to help either a family member or one of the patients? Can you tell us a story about that?
Yeah, I think for me, going through my medical training, it really was the families that were often labeled as sort of the difficult parents or the,
That
yeah,
would be
I
our
mean,
family, but that would be Cafarchio's, by the way.
not, maybe sometimes. We certainly have lots of different people in our family and lots of different emotions. Um, I'm thinking more of, going through training, I would go through the different ICUs. So part of the reason I did the med peds training, where I got to train as an adult doctor and a pediatrician, is I got to really try on all the different types of subspecialty care, including working through all the ICUs. And the patients and families that stuck out for me were the ones that, like, man, that mother is really difficult to talk to. She's really emotional and very hard to relate to. And I remember one specifically where it was the middle of rounds and we had to give bad news about this mother's son. And they said, Mike, can you just go in and talk to her? I was like,
let's get Mikey. Don't do it.
And I was like, okay, like it feels a little rushed. And like, I was an intern or a second year resident at the time. And I was like, I can do that. I don't know why my attending wasn't volunteering to do that, but it really keyed into me that it's a skill set that even many seasoned senior physicians don't have. And so I was identified early on as being one at like good at broaching these difficult conversations, having a lot of emotional intelligence, and then being able to guide people into making good choices. I have lots of specific examples, but I always try to keep it relatively vague just for patient.
Okay, so what happened with that one lady when they threw you in there?
She actually took the news great. So it was actually I developed a lot of rapport with her. We had a great relationship throughout her son's whole ICU stay. And I became sort of the point person for talking with her because we had a mutual understanding that I was there to help her. If I was giving bad news, it wasn't her fault. It wasn't her son's fault. It wasn't my fault. It was the situation and trying to navigate. So we know that this bad thing happened. What do we do next? How are we going to partner, and how are we going to do the next right thing?
Wow. So what was that like for you coming on the other side of that? A win, really. How did that make you feel? Did you discover anything?
Yeah, those are the times in my training where I felt most alive and I felt really excited and I really felt like I made a difference. And it's funny because you go through medical training and you think like, I guess I'm going to prescribe a medication or I'm going to do an operation and that's going to make me feel like, yes, I really contributed. But for me, it was actually those conversations where maybe everybody else was afraid to go in the room and they needed someone to lead and give bad news or to navigate a really difficult conversation. That's what makes me excited. And that's where I felt really alive during training. And I wanted to get more of that.
That is so awesome. Well, Mike, you and I went through a process where we unpacked your Gallup-Clifton Strengths profile. And I remember as we were looking at different talents that you score really high in, it's this picture started to emerge of, wow, oh, now that you're telling me more about your job, I see how these talents integrate and relate. What were some of the highlights for you when we were going through that?
I mean, it was very clear to me that the strengths finder was spot on in identifying what I considered my own strengths. A lot of it was around interpersonal communication and having empathy. I work really well on teams for that reason. Palliative medicine is a really big team sport where we work with not just doctors, but nurses, social workers, chaplains as well. So there's a big spiritual component to what we do. And that identity was also brought out in the strengths finder of sort of having ability to find interconnectedness and sort of a greater meaning for the work that we do as a team, and to help each other sort of lift each other up and bring the whole team to its best level of work.
Yeah, that was awesome. The other thing, Mike, I remember is that you love to mentor other people and to pass on your knowledge, and that relates really strongly to the talent of learner. Mm-hmm. And that's just playing out in multiple different ways in your life.
100%. And I think that I love to learn. I think, so I mentioned before, I chose specifically an area of training where I got to try out everything. I really was in every subspecialty, from the adults to kids, and having like a wide perspective on lots of different things, I think really makes me successful. Um, I think a lot about the sort of the Harry Potter houses, and I think I do identify with the Ravenclaw because of the studiousness and the learning. But I think what always brings me back is the heart, and I think I identify most with Gryffindor because they are all about following our passion, and I think that for me is my driving force, and kind of helps pull all these different strengths together.
For those of you who are not in the medical field, you may not be familiar that doctors and nurses, people in the healthcare, when they're getting their training, they go through something called a rotation, where they spend a certain amount of time in different departments so they can experience all those different things. And Mike, you were already telling us how different situations you just felt like this was a good fit and helped you come alive. This is, I just want to make that like kind of an instructional point, especially for younger people who might be listening to the show right now. You might hear this advice, follow your passion. Well, I don't know. How do I know what my passion is? You really do need to get yourself exposed to different situations. You just have to try things. You have to, put yourself into, take on a different project at work, whatever, volunteer for things, but you have to put yourself into different situations before you can really realize what resonates with your heart and your passions, as well as seeing some of your different talents take the front stage. Okay. So if someone was more analytical, Mike, real heavy analytical, and they were put into some really heavy, difficult, nuanced, emotional situations, they might feel like a fish out of water. But you put them in, computer science or accounting or something like that, they might come really alive. That's just a simplified example, but you don't know until you try it. And it sounds like, medical training, that's like, how long is the whole process? Like 8 years, 10 years?
Yeah, it's a lot of schooling. Yeah. So
Yeah.
after postgraduate, you have 4 years of medical school, 3 to 4 years of residency, and then subspecialty training after
That's
that.
after you've done your bachelor's and your master's. Yeah. So it's
after your bachelor's. Yep.
Yeah, after your bachelor's. So it's a ton. So he, Mike was put into all these different situations, and he found some areas he liked. Mike, were there any areas you just knew pretty quickly, like this is not going to be my fit?
Yeah, I did. I sort of took something away from every rotation, but I knew pretty quickly that it wasn't the technical aspects, like the procedural surgeries and things, that got me excited. But what I learned from my surgery rotation was that I liked taking care of really sick people. I actually was afraid to be, this may sound crazy as a medical trainee, but I was afraid of being in the ICU. I was afraid of dealing with really sick people. And during my surgery rotation, I realized that I didn't want to be in the OR doing the technical aspects of it, but I loved being there for people who are really having a challenging time and were really sick. So yeah, I was able to identify things I didn't like and still pull away the aspects of it I really enjoyed.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, folks, I'm talking to Mike Cafarchio about how talents and passion come together to really help you find your destiny. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll hear more from Mike. Hi there, Coach Pete here, and I'm so excited to tell you about a new course that we just released, Decoding Your Destiny. Over the past 20 years, I've worked with hundreds of people to curate the very best tools that will help you get more clarity on your life purpose and calling. The course uses 8 very easy to follow short videos and online fillable worksheets that help you record your answers and capture new insights. You're sure to get greater clarity on your life purpose and know specifically how you can make the best difference in the world. Go to petecoaching.com and look for online courses. I can't wait for you to get greater clarity and understanding for your destiny. Well, welcome back to Dynamic Destiny. I have my guest, Mike Cafarchio, who's a palliative care physician. And we're talking with Mike about how our talents and our passions can come together to really define our destiny. And Mike, before the show, you were telling me about how one time someone challenged you about getting into this field, and maybe you're a little reluctant. You got a little shove, so to speak. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so, when I decided to do the fellowship in palliative care and hospice, I think it was actually sort of a difficult thing for me to talk about because all along I planned to go to medical school and my family was 100% behind that. And I think they had in their head an idea of what type of doctor I would be when I came out, sort of a family doctor, kind of treating all types of illness. So to choose to focus on really the most difficult illnesses and even think about end of life, it was harder to talk about. It doesn't really come across well at a cocktail party, sort of can be sort of a downer. So it got me questioning, like, am I off my path? Is this not what I was supposed to be doing with my training? And then I was talking to one of my nurse practitioner colleagues, and she said something that stuck with me. And all she said was, Mike, if you can do this work and you can do it well, you have to do it. And I was like, is it really that simple? And I thought about it and I was like, this is the type of work that I feel I bring my whole self to. A lot of times during medical training, I felt I was using my doctor brain. I was thinking through the problems, but there was a part of me that wasn't coming to work. When I worked in hospice or I worked with my palliative care patients, I feel like I bring my whole self, my doctor brain, my emotional intuition, and my spirituality. And I get to be fully present with patients and to really bring my whole self to the table.
Wow.
So that was, yeah.
This is awesome. Mike, wow. Okay, guys, this is Dynamic Destiny, all right here, how it all came together. And Mike, you really just, we had the quote for the day, which I'm going to repeat again, but, God wonderfully made you different. You must make a wonderful difference. And I love what your colleague said to you. If you can do this, you have to do it. And the world needs it. And that's, folks, your destiny isn't about self-actualization. We talk about this from time to time. It's about giving yourself away in the best way to make the best difference. And if you can identify a need in the world that you're targeted for, that's where you're going to come alive. Now, it's a side benefit, right? That alive feeling. But I'll quote Jesus. He said this. He goes, if you seek to save your life, and in other words, make my life the best possible, you're going to lose it. But if you give your life, you lose your life. If you give it away, you're going to find it. And Mike, this is so beautiful just to hear that combo of, you've got your talents, you've got your passions, but when you also found that purpose to serve others, bam. So I bet you don't have a job anymore, right? You get to, that's awesome.
No, I really do think in a lot of ways, it feels like a calling. It feels like what I'm supposed to be doing. So I don't really question really exactly how I got here or how it might look to other people, because I know that I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. It feels right.
Yeah, that's awesome. And Mike, on your job, there's portions of your job where it's just mundane. I mean, good grief. You probably have an EHR system, which every doctor I've ever talked to absolutely hates, right? You've got hospital bureaucracy. You've got, well, I know you like to do ongoing learning and training, but there's a lot about it that you don't get to do the magic, right? And that's just part of life too, right? So I'm just thinking for any of our listeners here, you might be listening to Mike like, oh my gosh, that's beautiful. I'm just stuck in a dead end job. Well, it doesn't have to be dead end. A lot of it's what you make of your current situation. And you told us, hey, I was in a certain rotation and it wasn't my cup of tea, but I just still discovered things even in that rotation. Mike, how do you know? We talk about your passion and getting that alignment. How do you know? How can you use your gut, so to speak, as like an indicator of, that I found it or I'm in the right zone, so to speak?
Yeah, I think for me, I actually get a physical like gut reaction when I feel that something is right or even when something is wrong. I sort of have learned over time to trust that feeling. And for me, like things that get me impassioned, I can go trace all the way back to my childhood. I think I was always the guy who would befriend the new kid in school, or maybe the kid who was a little bit picked on or not included in the big circle. And you might say like, Mike, well, you're just like a white dude, like you don't really know what that's like. And I think because I was so introverted, I did sort of identify myself as an outsider, sort of studying everyone else. So for me, what gets me passionate is thinking about people who might be marginalized in our healthcare system, who may not have access to the full complement of what we can do in healthcare. And so I really believe it's important to be honest and invested in truth telling, and invested in making sure that people know what choices are available to them. We say a lot of times in palliative care, we are not invested in the outcome, but instead in the informed consent process to make sure
Hmm.
people are choosing based on all the options that are available to them and helping them match how their values and their goals may align with a specific medical course.
Okay. So that sounds like a set of values that you bring in, and I'm kind of not surprised because what you guys don't know is I know Mike's family and his mom actually chose to teach young kids in the school system, but especially immigrant families, because she has a heart for them to see them, get integrated well and to have the best chance at succeeding in life. So it's not surprising to me that passed on to you.
Yeah, and my mom would take me to summer school with some of the kids she was working with, and that definitely was a spark for me. In medical school, I was able to work with international refugees in Philadelphia and help them navigate the healthcare system. So it's definitely a common thread.
Well, Mike, another part of the story that you just told was that going with your gut and trusting it, and I think that would be a great setup for our Make It Real challenge this week. Okay, so here's your Make It Real challenge for anyone who's listening. Um, I would like you to just get paper and pen, or if you're going to type it, write out over the past 7 years a time when you resonated at a gut level with something you were engaged in. It's a time when you just felt alive. You felt like, wow, I was born for this, maybe. And don't worry about the details, like if you can turn it into a career or anything like that. That's not the point of the exercise. The point of the exercise is to pay attention to those things. So do some reflection, think back. Don't go more than 7 years because your life keeps evolving, and just write out any of those moments. Just spend 15, 20 minutes just thinking, trying to remember. Maybe nothing comes at first. Just start writing anything. Get your hand moving on the paper and with the pen, and just start thinking about the goal is to get in touch with your gut. It's sending you clues based on your talent set and your DNA, and spiritually too. There's clues coming in that are speaking to you. So we want you to learn to get in tune with those clues. Mike, we're starting to wrap this up here. Any other points that you wanted to share with our listeners?
Yeah, I love that Make It Real challenge because echoes a lot of what I do with my learners who work with me. Is in medicine, it's often the challenge is to pick a specific field or a specific subspecialty, and most people think like, well, I better love the kidneys if I'm going to be a kidney doctor, or I must love treating cancer to be a cancer doctor. And what I tell them is like, break it down even further than that. Think about the actual emotions you had going through training. What were the times you felt the most impassioned, whether that be angry or excited or feeling like you're really making a difference, think about that situation and what was that situation, and then pick a field that allows you to put yourself in those situations the most. Because like you said, there's every job you choose, there's going to be a downside. There's going to be things you don't enjoy. I always say they wouldn't pay you to do it if there wasn't part of the work that, it feels like a little bit of a labor. But pick a field that aligns the best and gives you the opportunity to be in those impassioned moments the most. And for me, hospice and palliative care, it really downplays the charting, and I get to maximize my time in front of patients, in front of families, interacting with them, getting to know them better, and going to those deeper conversations.
That's awesome, Mike. So I want to just kind of summarize this. There's been a fantastic discussion, but pointing at Mike as an example, but the self-awareness on your talents, super helpful to play in. Trying out different things and to find out what's a good fit, knowing what makes you come alive and what you're passionate about. And then when you talked about this last thing is about just paying attention to your gut, like where do you have resonance? That all comes together, and then you put on that, where does the world most need you to show up? Bam, what a great combination. And Mike, I'm glad for all of your patients and their families that you're showing up in their lives. And hey, listener, the world's waiting for you too, right? The world's waiting for you to step up. And it's not perfect. Mike's still learning, right? He's in his zone, but he's still learning. He's going to get better and better at it. We're all learning. And so you can too, but you got to start taking those first steps and just do your best. I want to repeat our quote for the day because it's just so pertinent. Ernest Yaboa told us that God wonderfully made you different. You must make a wonderful difference. So Mike Cafarchio, I want to thank you for being my guest. Mike's Twitter handle is at MCAFARCH. That's at MCAFARCH. I'll put it in the show notes as well. Mike, thanks so much for being here. It's been great having you as a guest.
Yeah, thank you so much. This has been a great conversation.
Okay, this has been Coach Pete. Remember, you really are God's gift to the world. We need you to be the best version of you that you can be. Bye-bye. Thank you, my friend, for joining me on this episode of Dynamic Destiny. As a reminder, you can get more free tools and downloads at petecoaching.com. Let's continue the discussion. Write to me with your questions and feedback. Ask Pete at petecoaching.com. Be sure to tell your friends, and please leave a 5-star podcast review. I can't wait to have you join me next time on Dynamic Destiny.